And this is the place for intellectual, spiritual, and scriptural honesty. Tonight we have an experiment once again. It's actually a time in which we're going to attempt this Google Hangout and see what it evolves into. And I'm not going to spend long at the beginning establishing something that is from quote unquote the Bible, but I wanted to make a couple of comments from the Bible. And I want to give some of our viewers plenty of time to actually get involved in the Hangout. But Joey and Greg Bray, they will more or less be controlling the back and forthness of this dialogue along with Bob Graves. And so it's going to be a respectful and kind conversation. And it's going to be about morals. Where did we get our morals? Where did we get right and wrong? And so with that said, I'd like to read a passage from the NIV. And it's about what the Apostle Paul is suggesting in chapter 3, verse 9. And if we could, someone's making a lot of noise. If we could cut that out, I would appreciate
Greg, can you find out where that noise is coming from? Okay, we may just need to turn the Hangout down momentarily.
Yeah.
I just got. All right, can you move your way over to the mixer as soon as possible? Okay.
Okay, we're going to look. We're going to look at chapter 3 of the book of Romans. Make some brief statements, and then I think it's going to be wonderful to get started. The Apostle Paul is not actually saying this. This is simply a rendering of one of the various models of translation theories. What shall we say then? That is chapter 3 of the book of Romans, verse 9. Are we any better? And he states, not at all. We have already made the charge that the Jews and the Gentiles alike are all under sin. Now, many people in theology spin this as the premise for our condition. And I want us to look at this. It says in verse 10, as it is written. Now, Paul starts quoting what he learned as a child. There is no one righteous, not even one. There is no one who understands. That would be God. No one who seeks God. All have turned away and have together become worthless. And there is no one who does good, not even one. And as we continue to read these particular verses, we will find that there is an argument that Paul is suggesting concerning man's inability. And so I'm not suggesting that the Greek text is in agreement with this inability of mankind, but certainly it's true that the NIV is spinning it in that particular direction. I wanted to make one other comment from another passage, because most of the Calvinists really utilize these verses to tell people who are not believers, that is, in their idea of theology, that they don't have the capacity to believe because they are not good, number one, and they are not capable of believing. And so they also make another point from 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 14, which states, the man without the Spirit does not accept the things that come from the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness unto him, and he cannot understand them. Therefore, they have to be spiritually discerned. And since unbelievers do not have spiritual discernment, they have the problem, they have the lack of understanding, therefore they can't logically accept. And so the context is man is totally depraved in the context of Calvinism. Other models of theology, man is not completely depraved. There are various arguments here. But in this model, we find that something is being contested. Number one, that man is essentially evil. And so the question tonight is going to be about where did our morals come from? Did they come from God or from something else? And so that's the discussion. I will not be involved in the discussion. I'm going to be sitting here listening and trying to keep the discussion going forward. I simply wanted to put two passages of Scripture into play that may be a topic and may not be part of the that may be a part of the topic or may not be part of the topic. And so I'm going to yield my microphone and camera to Joey and Greg and Bob Graves. Welcome to the show.
All right, let's everybody give me a hand. Thank you. All right. I just got done screaming at our Hangout. Sometimes I forget that our guests don't always know when I'm joking. So, first of all, I want to let everybody know in our Hangout know that I was mainly yelling at Daryl and Greg because I love to yell at them. All right, so let's begin. Greg, I'm going to hand this over to you since you are the most likely to be excited about the scriptures that were just read, and find out what your thoughts are.
Well, you absolutely know that I am depraved and incapable of loving God. So this is why I find this topic so important. Realistically, though, the reason that I thought this would be a good topic this week is because we talked about it last week, just after the show was done. We got into the question of values and morals and how people establish where they are. But I want to say we have some repeat participants this week. We've got Dennis, Ariel, Nick. Of course, there's Bob still there. And Joey and the people in the studio, you guys don't count. But we have some new people, so I wanted to give a quick opportunity for them to introduce themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Why don't you pick one out so that they know?
Well, Christian was the latest edition. We have not been able to test his microphone yet, so let's see if that works.
Let's find out. Hey, Christian. Nope, doesn't work. Let's move on to somebody else and let Christian get that fixed.
Yep, you'll need to fix the mic.
Then we also have Michael.
Who's our other new guy?
Speaking.
All right.
You've got me.
Okay, we've got a nice big picture of you. State your name, sir.
Yeah, this is Mike Nelson, and I don't have a camera set up yet, but will in the future.
Wonderful.
And just briefly here, I'm 59 years old. I was a former Christian of 44 years. I have a deep understanding of biblical scholarship, scientific theory in various disciplines, and I believe I can bring a lot to the subject this evening.
Very good. Who else do we have, Greg?
I am not familiar with our other member, but I think they came here with Dennis. So,
yes, he's a friend of mine. His name is Alex.
Hey, Alex.
He's waving.
Alex, can you talk? Does your microphone work?
No, it does not work.
I'm a newbie.
Very good. If you don't have a microphone and you want to type something in the chat, feel free to do so, and Greg will keep an eye on that.
Oh, everyone is sleeping already in this house.
Okay, let's jump right into this. We just had 2 verses read. If you want to grab on to those verses and address them, the subject is, Greg, tell us the subject.
Well, I guess it's a little bit ambiguous now that I didn't know we were going to open with Scripture.
The origin of ethics.
The
yes. Origin of ethics. That is the subject. Where does our system of ethics and morality come from? Now, Dr. Jones opened it with a scripture because we do have some theists in our midst, and our English texts speak of ethics and morals being completely separated from human beings before they have the Spirit of God. Us as human beings having zero understanding of what they are or how we should behave in goodness until God brings us into the fold. Is that why you brought those verses up, Dr. Jones?
I did. I thought it was very, very important to really key in on what most theists bank on when it comes to the goodness in them, because most theists think that goodness comes exclusively from God. And so most of us who have been raised in theism say, well, I was never good until I got saved or something like that. And so that is a major, major verse that I read that is in Romans chapter 3. Mm-hmm. And also in 1 Corinthians, where it talks about the inability to accept or understand because I don't have or I lack spiritual discernment. And so those are major concerns, that is, for theists in this discussion.
Very good. And I also tricked you because you said you weren't going to participate, and yet I will trick you several times before the day is done.
I'm just here to shut it down and open it up. That's all.
Oh, I got you. Okay.
Mike,
what?
I would have to go. Who's speaking?
Go ahead, Bob. You have something to say after you speak. I'm going to ask our guest Mike what he has to say.
When I look at this verse from Romans, and it quotes a whole bunch of Old Testament. I am a theist, but I got to tell you, this strikes me as the pot calling the kettle black. And if you're going to define morality and ethics as being founded in the God as they had grasped it and understood him, and the things they felt sanctioned to do that I would consider to be greatly immoral, no wonder they could also come to the conclusion that, well, if you don't know our God, you can't possibly know morals, because... but it to me, it's like it's an accusation that comes only from the concept of, I noticed you guys aren't like we are, but it does strike me as the pot calling the kettle black.
Mike, do you have any thoughts on this?
Sure. The thing about that, when you talk, I see no problem with morality having a perfectly natural explanation that does not need a supernatural component. The problem is you see a great deal of discussion between people that say that morality is objective and other people say that it's relative. It's neither. Morality to the human species is ubiquitous to us. It's ubiquitous to us because we're a highly evolved mammalian social species, that we need a long-term nurturing process because we have cognitive skills rather than physical traits that provide for our survival. So we bond early and young, and then we have the altruistic behavior of cooperation, trust with each other, and care for each other that's critical to our survival because of our social species of these cognitive skills. Now, over time, through the environmental pressure of natural selection over the millennium, we've been hardwired in a ubiquitous manner of a moral construct, which is our conscience. That conscience is what provides the basis for our moral laws. It is a natural process.
That's good.
So, Mike, I'd like to give you a follow-up question on that. How do you account then for the variety of moral laws that humans have developed if it does come from a mutually evolved conscience?
Well, again, we don't evolve in a vacuum. We evolve under selective environmental pressures through natural selection. So there are a number of aspects to the way people work in that. But to answer your question specifically, there's genetic variations in us. For instance, sociopathic and psychopathic people, which is my definition of evil, that is the lack of empathy, those individuals have genetic markers that show a physical variation. We have mutations that affect that ubiquitous moral conscience. So that will bring apart some of those variations, but that's a very good observation on that.
Nick, I know that you have your own personal agenda when it comes to sociopaths, so I wanted to give you the floor here.
As most sociopaths do.
Right.
Yeah, of course. So I've studied it a little bit, and there's not just genetic variation. There are born psychopaths that we know of. It's a very small percentage of the population. I don't know that we've pinned down exactly the genes that are responsible for that yet, but there are also sociopaths that are created. And the mechanism of their creation has to do with basically not bonding to caregivers early on, not having the proper social environment. And we can actually see in these people who probably otherwise would have been normal, we can see that they have actual brain damage, particularly centered in the lateral amygdala, the lateral nucleus of the amygdala. And so, they've got actual brain damage. It looks like it's excitotoxic or otherwise stress-caused. And things that happen to you can actually change your brain. They can kill off cells. They can grow cells, grow connections, kill off connections. So it's about a 17% negative functional anisotropy in the left amygdala in the average psychopath, detectable on an MRI. That's all.
That was very technical. I have to say, as a biologist, I'm not even familiar with the research that you're talking about on that particular variation.
What a nerd.
Yeah.
I can make some comments on that.
Ariel, it's good to see you back, man. What do you have to say about
Nice to be
all
here.
this?
Thank you.
Jump in?
A little bit of research I've been doing into neuroplasticity, which talks about it takes 3 years for the brain to completely rewire itself, to have a full change. So you were talking about that failure to connect. For example, if you were to take a sociopath and put them in an environment where someone is consistently connecting with them in a positive way, that they're not in any danger, they could actually start creating more of the dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine connections that normal people just have all this. They do socially acceptable things in order to get the reward pathway triggered. But
Neuroplasticity is amazing, and the ability of us to recover from a great number of damage that can be done.
Absolutely.
All right,
I wanted to kind of just go back a little bit to that original discussion of, from a purely biblical standpoint, the origination of morals. Because my bent was to say morals are experiential. I thought that was a great analysis from Michael. Excellent, very, very insightful. And the whole idea, that we were like God, we were made in His image, we acted like Him, we had the morals of God, we participated in the same thing, we were in full agreement with Him, and then we ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and we lost sight of that moral, that experiential moral imperative. And then, in the knowledge of evil, stopped being able to perfectly experience the moral perfection. And then the tendency was actually a negative tendency. What do I want to say? Where, for example, yes, I can rewire my brain through knowledge, but I find in my experience, the tendency tends to be that traumas build, especially if there's really bad ones earlier on. So, for example, people who've been sexually abused, people have had major traumas, have a harder time dealing with those and coming back to just kind of a normal way of acting, or in other words, being able to be more experientially good, where they're enjoying their experience of life and not causing anyone else pain.
Dennis?
Yeah. I'm done.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. There was a pause there. So,
yep.
We have a lot of people participating today, so I'm trying to make sure everybody gets a good opportunity to speak.
Let's find out if Christian's mic is working now. Christian, is your mic working?
There is a raise your hand. Nick likes to do that.
Is your mic working? Christian, is your mic working?
He's trying to.
If you can see up in the upper right corner, you might find that you have a microphone with a line through it, red.
Yeah, is it muted maybe? Christian, we really want you to participate. Let's go over to Daryl. Daryl, have you been listening to all this?
I have.
All right. Let's hear your thoughts.
Okay, I don't have much I could contribute to what I've been hearing. It's very interesting.
Well, let's start from the question: where do morals and ethics come from in human beings? What's your opinion on that?
Well, as a theist, I would have to say that I believe they come from God. But dealing with a passage that Dr. Jones mentioned, specifically the one that says that no one can understand, no one can know anything about God unless he has the Spirit. From the standpoint of Scripture, there's a problem with that in the fact that we find in the same Scripture that God is actually in all of us. We find that according to what Paul says, or what we find in the book of Ephesians, that this God that we're in reference to is the God and Father of all, who's over all, who's through all, and who's in all. And I think that this has been the great failure in, recognizing, that moral character that would describe this God. I was thinking about something that Greg stated earlier, and I wanted to address you just for a moment, Greg. I know you were, it was tongue in cheek, but I caught the statement when you said that we know you're totally depraved, that you can't love God at all. Something along that line.
You thought that was tongue in cheek? I didn't get that impression.
Oh, you didn't? Okay.
That was absolutely serious.
I think I know Greg better than that, because I'd like to ask Greg the question, do you love yourself, Greg?
I try not to. No, it's
but you can't help it.
It's an interesting question, and I think that the assumption that everybody loves themselves is even that isn't always true. There have been times where I've not been a real big fan of myself, and
I can identify.
I think that's a reality that we need to recognize as well.
Well, not being a fan of yourself and loving yourself are two different things. When I'm not a fan of myself, it's not because I'm not a fan of my existence. I'm just not a fan of my behavior.
Bob, could you ever kill somebody you loved?
That's a good point.
Could I?
Yes.
Well, I have no idea if I could. I've never been in a situation where that was even a temptation. I can't conceive of it. But, I have known some people who did commit murder, and they were not always people I would have thought, well, that's not a surprise. But the passion and duress and stress is not the same thing as who we are, unless we let that, that's not where I don't derive my identity from my ongoing experience.
Let's go back over to Daryl. Daryl, why were you asking Greg if he loved himself?
Well, because the God that we're in reference to here, that let's just say for the sake of argument, the God that we find in our Bibles, when we try to cipher out exactly what really describes him, according to what I just stated and what we find in the book of Ephesians, he's actually in us all. And so, when we hear the command, love one another, then in the same sense, by loving one another, loving ourselves, we love God. And so that was the reason for my question.
Daryl, you're so kind. Had you been, there are some theists and Christians who would take the approach that you're taking to prove to Greg that God exists.
I'm kind of like Bob in that respect. I don't know that I can do that, but it's just food for thought. My contribution to the conversation.
So the morals that we have then, Daryl, do come from the fact that God is within us. That's your position here?
Yes, I would say that. And it's not God controlling us by any means. It's just a nature that we have. And, I think that I like the conversation about the brain. You lose me there, but, I'm sure that we have malfunctions there. And it's wonderful that medically they can figure these things out and actually help people in that respect. But yes, I would say that within us all, there's these moral qualities that actually cause us to truly care about one another, to care about ourselves. Actually, I'll have to admit, I love myself. If I feel pain, I try to stop that pain and so forth. And realizing that, it helps me realize that when someone else is in pain, I would do what I can to help them in that respect. So,
I think that early Jewish thought was not really too far away from what Michael Nelson was actually saying. Something gets lost in the cultural translation. Jews would be very, they would always attribute things to God as a form of respect or acknowledgement of creation. But that didn't mean that they were attributing it to God as if God was something other than nature itself in terms of the way it works. So if a person believes that God made us what we are, they can still believe that morality is something that is intrinsic to our nature and that comes out of our very nature, and still attribute that to God, only because they attribute the existence to God. But this I see it as an entirely artificial, harmful, and actually immoral notion, the idea that I myself am bereft of any of this and that I somehow need to latch on to a morality that isn't even really mine in order for me to be moral.
Bob, can I add something to that? This is Mike again.
Yeah.
How would we, I appreciate the sentiment of those things, but one has to ask this, and if you watch a NOVA program of how animals think, it'll explain this with some very specific experiments. Altruistic behavior is shown by all highly cognitive mammalian species.
Sure.
Clear down to altruistic behavior with mice. And it progresses, it goes up progressively stronger till you get into the monkeys and the apes, and of course takes a quantum leap with the cognitive ability of humans. So, and people at that time weren't aware of that kind of information. We wouldn't dare say then God is in all mammals showing this altruistic behavior, or
I'd say it.
Okay.
Yeah, I definitely would say it. I mean, I don't see, we're different. I mean, cats are cats and dogs are dogs and people are people. And the tremendous variety of that which has emerged, still, it all possesses its own nature, And
but would that mean would a lot of theists would say, oh no, animals don't have souls, only us? They would think that morality is tied into a soul because we're created in God's image, but animals are not. What would be your feelings on that?
My feeling is that I don't believe that morality is a thing in and of itself. It is a response of our awareness of our nature, and it grows out of that awareness. And so that as a result, although I would attribute that nature to God, all it requires of a human being to possess that moral character is awareness. That in of itself is totally sufficient to bring about that morality. And I would even go so far as to say that people who try to turn what was that original Jewish concept or Hebrew concept of just attributing to God these things as the creator, that when they over-exaggerate that, I think they actually impede their moral development. And that, so, I mean, functionally, it is an entirely intrinsic emergence of awareness.
Bob, I'm going to start giving you a timer.
Yeah, sorry. There you
go. Nick raised his hand here. He's got something to say, and Dennis has not had a chance to say anything either. So I just am moderating. I'm going to throw my 2 cents in at one point. But Nick, we didn't hear your opinion on where morals actually come from. You just sort of responded to Mike. So,
well, I wanted to hit a couple of things. First, Ariel, I don't know where you heard the brain rewires itself in 3 years, but no. There are sensitive periods, for one, in terms of childhood development, and you can't get that back. Vision is one of them. There's a lot of experiments on vision that would be very helpful to look into, especially with kittens. It's very mean. Second of all, the idea of loving yourself gives you some sort of an ethical sociality. Doesn't make sense to me, because psychopaths love themselves very much, and that's about all that they could be said to love in any sense. So I don't really quite understand that. But to get down to the main point, where I think what I actually think about ethics is in line with Michael's viewpoint, that it is socialized into us genetically as apes, which we are, and that there are basically 2 primary modes of evolution. There is the sort of the selfish gene of Richard Dawkins, The idea that we are individualistically self-serving. We want to spread our genes and only our genes, and the mode of evolution which psychopathy is an excellent example of. These are people divorced from sociality. They don't want to work together. They want to advance themselves, their own genetic makeup, and that's it. And all else be damned. That, I think, is the biblical. If you want to take an overview, there's a lot of evil stuff in the Bible. People, genocide, murder, rape, etc., that God supposedly sanctions. I chalk that up to humanity writing the thing.
Yeah.
But I think that if you take an overview, the idea of evil in the Bible is directly in line with the psychopath. The concept of the devil is directly in line with the psychopath. I think it's a mythological description of psychopathy in a sense, and sort of personifying this disorder. And I think that goodness in that sense also is the social mode of evolution, which is mutualistic, somewhat collectivistic, although collectivism is a different concept. Mutualism in evolutionary theory is the best term for it.
Nick, I have a question for you.
I'm done.
I have a question for you, Nick. Is there a difference between loving yourself and fulfilling your own desires and cravings?
Is there a difference?
Is there a difference in your opinion?
In some sense, no. In other senses, yes. I mean, they're similar things. They have to do with each other. They're very linked to each other psychologically, but
okay. So
there are differences between those two concepts.
Certainly, and from a psychopath's perspective, and I haven't delved deeply into this, but I would suggest that the type of love that they have for themselves is the love that fulfills one's own desires and cravings. But I think that there are different types of love being discussed in this room. I think some people think of love for oneself as not necessarily always fulfilling one's desires and cravings, but of restraining oneself under certain circumstances, of doing something to oneself that might be the opposite of pleasure, but might be of benefit. Something that, for instance, I do certain things towards my children that they don't enjoy, but I feel that it benefits them, and I'm also mature enough to do those things to myself out of self-discipline, out of self-control, and it benefits me in the long run. Whereas I think that that the type of love you're talking about that a mentally ill person can have for themselves is often a short-term fulfilling of one's desires and cravings. And I think there's, I personally, I can accept that could be called love, but I think that there is a distinct difference.
Yeah.
Let me throw two quick.
I got one response.
Dennis
to that.
has not had
Very
a chance
short.
to say anything, so I'm going to say, Michael. Nick, go ahead and make your quick response. Dennis, please contribute, and then Michael, you can.
Okay. Yeah.
Nick can't make it quick, but he's going to try.
Who going first, Michael?
Watch him. Go ahead, Nick.
There are plenty of self-disciplined psychopaths out there. This was one of the key issues with regard to psychopathy, Hare's version of psychopathy versus antisocial personality disorder as defined in DSM-4. Antisocial personality disorder has to do with the frontal lobe, the frontal cortex dysregulation, which can be a result of psychopathy, but there are functional, invisible psychopaths out there, and they're quite self-disciplined. So I disagree.
Okay, but just because I use the word self-discipline doesn't mean that I was equating love with self-discipline. I'm saying that there is a type of love that exerts self-discipline and doesn't always do things towards oneself out of a sheer desire to fulfill pleasure, selfish pleasures and cravings. But anyways,
discipline is the tool, but not the motivation.
Greg is quite right.
The disciplined psychopath is much more dangerous than the undisciplined one.
Certainly, I agree. But just hold on just a minute. Greg is quite right. There are certain people in this room who haven't been given time. I would like to go over to Dennis to find out if he has anything to say. Dennis.
Well, I was I was just searching for a quote from a movie, and I found it very interesting. And it's like, it is our choices that show what we truly are, and far more than our abilities. I don't know how I come up to this, but I think
read it again.
So read it again. Okay. I said it's our choices that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities.
Okay.
That I quoted from a movie, but I was thinking like, I was like, the morality we have is, most of the time we get also some teachings from our parents how to do things, but it's never the same. And
very good. Greg, why don't you refocus us and give us? Why don't you give us your thoughts and refocus us, please?
Okay, well, so far I wanted to just recap. We have Michael and Nick are both making an evolutionary argument. We have Daryl, Bob, and Ariel to some extent making a slightly more divine origin argument in one extent or another. I mean, it's hard to lump the three of them with what they said together. And Dennis appears to be leaning more in my direction, which is that morality is a personal advancement, I guess. It's a social construct that we each develop on our own personally. When I say that it's a social construct, I mean that we're not developing this in a bubble. And yes, I agree with Michael and Nick that we have evolved the capacity to do this. But I subscribe pretty strongly to the almost entirely blank slate opinion. People may be predisposed towards a certain type of personality that could influence their perspective on moral issues. But I believe that the values that we use to produce our morality are things that we are given from our society, our culture, our parents, and our personal life experiences. I think that that regardless of whether that has to do with us treating each other due to an innate understanding of a divinity between one another, or any other reason from an external source, it's pretty evident that our morality is not universal by any standard, and there's not a single action that has been considered right or considered wrong across all of human history.
So
to say that morality comes
but
from...
Greg, I would say that the one weakness I find in what point you may be trying to make is this: there is no universal language on the earth, and yet everywhere where the capacity to speak exists, language exists. And we find that there's something about language that is innate to the nature of being human.
Well, the same is true of morality. I see what you're going through.
And so I would say,
not a moral code, but more
right. No, you're right. So there's a difference between morality and a moral code. The fact that we all experience a sense of that there is right and wrong does not mean that we always agree on what is right or what is wrong. But even when we disagree as to what is right and what is wrong, we still seem to reduce things to a right and wrong evaluation.
The thing I wanted to throw in here real fast, Nick, I believe, is right on key with the idea that all evil that we see of humans doing to other humans is a lack of empathy, that you're able to take advantage and use and abuse someone because you lack that empathy, that sociopathic perception of that. The only other thing I wanted to add, Greg, you're right, nature, nurture. I believe that the nature has significant evidence, but there's also nurture from a social construct involved with that. And one other quick thing here, the idea of loving yourself, my opinion is in a healthy individual, loving yourself simply means accepting yourself and being comfortable with who you are. In the sociopathic case, loving yourself is a feeling of grandeur.
Yes. I agree.
Yeah.
So then I think to refocus the question, and this one we're going to have to sort of open it up as a bit more of a grab bag. Unfortunately, with having this many people as part of the conversation, it can be difficult to get them. I'm going to step out after this question, and except for maybe directing a bit. But Nick has a great policy with raising his hand, so anybody with a video feed, feel free to use that. But we, I think, have come to a conclusion here that between everybody, we've all agreed that there is some sort of morality that exists. And it seems that there's a consensus that it is based on empathy. It's based on love. That's the common theme. So now the question is, how can we determine or at least the question that I have, if anybody else wants to redirect it, you're welcome to. How can we determine the best understanding of love to try to come up with any sort of universal code that more people can agree with? And I'm not saying that we can apply it in an authoritarian manner, but something that can be compelling to other people if we explain it to them. I think this is what the New Covenant group is all about. So help us with this mission.
Right.
I think personally that when it comes to explain love to other people, it's just by to be a listening ear to them, just little simple things. Maybe, yeah. That's
how can you use that? I mean, I'm specifically trying to say, how do we influence bad morality? The issues, because as I said, morality is a cultural construct, and there's a lot of people who will say that some things that are completely hateful are morally right. And I think that that's a really significant thing that we need to address. It looks like Ariel has a response to that.
Mm-hmm. I've just been just thinking, like, instead of making a code, what if we just had of like, you know, how do you act when it's done, when you're moral? What if we changed this question slightly to say, like, what is it that's common in the human experience? What are the different parts of that understanding that once you have mastered all those dynamics or know them, and like in the Greek gnosis kind of knowledge way, that you will be able to work out yourself what's moral.
Codes always create loopholes. Mm-hmm. There's no, codes are useless. There's a sense in which I think love is a vision. It is a sense of what it should look like if all is well. And therefore, the morality, in a sense, is really a response to the circumstance and situation, and thinking, what does this situation call for, to allow it to emerge into something more in keeping with this vision. And that could be almost anything. And so I really don't think that morality can be reduced to a code in its, foundationally. I think we have to reduce it to a code negotiating it. I mean, we drive on one side of the street, not the other. So we need to codify things to cooperate, but we have to negotiate it. And I don't think beyond that you can really accomplish what you asked, Greg.
Daryl has a comment to make. And Daryl, let me just say to you, the rules don't apply to you about raising your hand because we can't see you. So you're going to have to be like me, and that is rude. And just interrupt.
Same to you as well, Michael.
Slightly immoral.
Yeah. So go ahead, Daryl. Please.
Okay, I just wanted to make a suggestion, just kind of throw it out there. Since we're talking about love and how we can determine exactly, how to detect it or something along that line, I would like to suggest that we're experiencing it right now. I'm sitting here with a group of men that most of you I haven't seen. I know that there's probably quite a few differences in our belief system and certainly in our abilities and so forth. But we're having a very civil conversation. It seems like we all have somewhat of a common goal here, willing to take the time for one another, let one another speak. In my estimation, we're experiencing a little of that love right now.
Yes, as we continue to have this discussion, and when I say this discussion, I'm talking about the larger discussion that we at the New Covenant Group continue to have over and over again about various topics. Our group of participants expands. So the question that Greg was asking is, how can this group, this New Covenant group, and the people who are becoming part of it, how can we influence the morality of those outside of it? And so while your question doesn't actually answer, or while your comment doesn't actually answer that question, it does in a sense, because as we continue to have this conversation, people become part of that group, and I think that's wonderful. I would suggest that that when it comes to influencing morality, one thing that you cannot do is try to influence it directly by trying to correct somebody, because the moment you do that, their most immoral behavior kicks into gear most of the time, and they will tell you where to stick it, and I know that because that's what I will do. But I'll tell you what does change me is when I'm being rude and somebody else is being kind. It might not change me right away. I might say, "Wow, this person is just going to let me step all over them," and I just begin to do so. But after that happens consistently over and over again, eventually I start feeling pretty stupid. I start feeling pretty foolish because I realize that somebody is treating me better than I'm treating them. And we have a policy on Facebook and on the New Covenant Group pages that I am often trying to find reasons to break this policy, but Dr. Jones and Rhonda are very adamant about this, and that is that when people are rude to us, when they are condemning us, when they're sending us to hell in their minds, we are consistently just trying to encourage them to engage in the conversation. We're being kind to them. We're finding every opportunity to find goodness in them and point it out. And I think that this is the only hope for influencing morality outside of a core group who understands how to be civilized to one another.
I agree.
I want to say Nick gave a response to this. His answer is indoctrinating children, it seems. He said sensitive developmental periods. He just typed it in. So
there is much to be said about upbringing. Indoctrination
I'm pretty sure that's
is a
the Christian
strong
tactic.
word.
You know what? They can get over that. I know that from experience.
Yeah. But there's something to be said about the childhood years. I mean, I don't agree with the word indoctrination. I know he was joking, but there is a time in our lives when we have no choice. We have no choice but to listen to the people around us. And when we get bigger and older, we can make that choice. And so during that time when we know very little and we're made to sit in certain places, the fortunate ones among us are those who are surrounded by adults who teach us to think and set a good example for us, instead of adults who tell us what to think and set a bad example.
Right.
Greg, to answer your question, this is Mike again. In respect for the New Covenant Group, I would have a commandment: thou shalt not use anyone for personal gain or any other reason.
It's good.
I think it's a good idea, but it's still coming from a legalistic or authoritative sense. And that's, I think, the problem with discussing morality and any sort of normative value. Is there a way that we can influence it without simply telling people what to do? Then my contention on this is that everyone develops their own personal moral schema from their experiences in life, and a lot of that comes from their culture and their upbringing. But realistically, it's not given to them directly, and as much as people like to assume that they are, unless they very highly value tradition, because then they're following a tradition. And that still is a subjective personal value. I think that there are only a handful of real things that people can hold in high value. And if we can influence that so that people realize the value of love and the value of kindness and the anti-value of harm and hatred, then we can change the world far more than by telling people what to do.
Right, Greg, and there's only one way you can do that. And that's through there's only one way any of us can do that, and that's through our actions. We have to act, period. We can't say a thing. We cannot debate it. We act it.
Okay, Ariel has had his hand up, and after Ariel speaks, I want to see if we can get the yellow underwear to say anything.
Awesome. Nick also does have his hand up too.
So I've been reading this book called Radical Honesty by Brad Blanton, and going back a bit, I had read Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People, and he said one way is to, if anything's good, talk about it long and loud. And I've done that, and I've won some friends, and I've influenced some people, to see themselves in better ways, to defeat some of their negative self-talk. But then Brad gives the balancing approach to that is he said, tell people what you appreciate about them, but tell them what you resent too. And, as a Christian, as a moralist, it was like, I'm supposed to focus on good, and I can't have a place where I can honestly tell people, I'm hating how I'm feeling, and I'm feeling influenced by what you're doing, that I'm making a connection here, and maybe, how they're affecting me is, if they just stop that thing, maybe my feeling would stop. That's negative. And
I think that there's more than just that value in talking to people about the qualities that you see in them that you don't think are good. I think there is a place for that, and I have always found that if all I do with the people that I love or the people that I'm getting to know is talk about all the good things about them that I see, eventually they're going to think I'm just blowing smoke up their ass. But if I spend a little bit of time being honest with them, having an argument with them, being frank with them about something that I disagree with, about whatever, something that they said or something that they're doing, then that makes the moments where I find something sincerely good about them more meaningful and real, I think, and that's my opinion.
Faithful are the wounds of a friend, and sometimes a person can really benefit from hearing things they maybe don't want to hear, and you can do that because it's really in their best interest, and if you have their best interest in mind when you offer that criticism, you're genuinely seeking to be constructive. And so I think that I don't think it's right morally to be nice.
Yeah.
We're going to take about 10 more minutes, and then we're going to end this program. But I want to see if the yellow underwear has anything to say. Yellow underwear, are you there? Yellow underwear?
He's been typing as Chris Vandenacker, and I don't know if Chris is a guy or a gal. But there, can you hear me? We cannot hear you, but we can see your typing.
All right.
He says he's a guy.
Okay.
But
who else wants to jump in here?
Nick has been waiting patiently here to.
Go ahead, nerd.
All right. So, I've got a theory about evil, and I already told you guys what I think evil is as a mode of evolution, the individualistic mode versus the mutualistic mode, which I would call good. But evil, in the sense of the brain damage, and it really is brain damage that can be caused by abuse, by not fulfilling childhood sensitive periods in childhood development. I see it as a sort of a communicable virus of the mind. I think it is similar to sort of like a computer virus. It's not the same thing, but analogous, and it's passed from generation to generation. Abuse victims many times become abusers.
Passed genetically or passed socially?
People who have a psychopathic disorder of some kind or an antisocial disorder of some kind tend to take that out on innocent people, and those innocent people can be damaged, not just psychologically, but as we've seen with MRI studies, their brains can actually be damaged or underdeveloped, and that can perpetuate a cycle. And I see it as analogous to a virus.
Culture can be abusive. I think that, I look at the Vietnam War, because they were communists and we were people who believed in a democracy. We somehow thought this was okay to go out and kill them.
Yeah.
To me,
that's a cultural psychopathy.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't understand.
Culture. In my view of culture is that it is a mass psychosis.
Yes.
And culture can be psychotic. Culture can be psychopathic. Culture can be extraordinarily evil. Look at the type of culture that the Nazis attempted to develop intentionally. But they were intentionally directing culture and trying to develop a very specific culture based on Nietzschean principles and other assorted evil principles. And yeah, that's sort of a mixture, though. That type of fascism is a mixture of collectivism and individualism. It wasn't as purely individualistic as the Ayn Rand worshipping Satanism, let's call it what it is, Levian Satanism, that the United States has taken on apparently and called Christianity.
Wow.
And Christianity is very anti-Christ nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
I would have to agree.
I agree.
Daryl, anything else to add to this conversation?
Oh, yes. I've got something I would just like to share. Last night, we witnessed something that probably most that are involved here tonight have witnessed at some time or another. My 17-year-old son is the youngest member of the Beaumont Civic Orchestra. And I just wanted to throw that in there. But we went to a performance last night. And to me, that was one of the best examples of the very thing that we're talking about here, the collectiveness and so forth. I watched a group of people, I don't know the exact number, maybe 50, 75 people, whose purpose of coming together was to fit, to do their part. They're open for correction. They want to get their part right so it'll fit and it'll create something beautiful. And that's got to be one of the best experiences that can be had, to be a part of something like that, that takes the contribution of everyone. And to me, it's just a perfect picture of the way everything needs to work. You know, I listen tonight, I hear input from different people, and I hear a lot of meaning coming from every direction. And, you know, working together like this, to me, this is what's needed. And that's what I love about New Covenant Group. That's where we're going. That's where we want to continue to go. And the more the merrier, you know, and it's a meaningful contribution. It's something that benefits all. And I think that's pretty good criteria for determining whether there's love involved or not.
All right, Nick, where can we mail you your New Covenant Group T-shirt?
I'll give you the address.
All right.
I still got one too, right?
I don't even have a New Covenant Group T-shirt. I wear the same shirt for every show. It's the only one I own.
I want it to be clear. I wanted to be clear.
Let's take up a contribution and send Greg a shirt.
I wanted to be clear that Nick is going to be the first person to get a New Covenant Group T-shirt. I like to just sit in silence for a while.
Wow.
Keep this going. Yeah.
Well, can I interrupt, please?
Absolutely.
Sure.
Okay. As I want to say, I think the best way to influence people, when back to the love thing, is just to be friends with them, to become friends, step by step. And you don't try to, you listen to this, I have the right truth, but go chilling with them, just do fun stuff. And I think that is more healthy, because I think there are too many people isolated because of cultures and maybe moralities they have been learned, and that's why they know maybe also sought hatred, because they are not aware of, they have not information about other people, and they're displaced in boxes. I think that's why it's better to be friends, so the box will be moved away, and actually we're going to jump into each other's world with respect and love, of course. And to be to grow up each other, to make each other mature in that.
I'm going to make a strong statement here, possibly. And we have just a few minutes left. You're welcome to respond, but the statement is this: that religion is the enemy of global friendship and morality.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to get any argument from me out of that.
Only if that religion or faith-based worldview has an in-group and an out-group.
Mm-hmm.
If they're inclusive to everyone, it's different. But if they have out-groups, yes, it can territorialize people into tribal conflict.
And I realize that
our tribal people, so... I mean, we're a
yes,
tribal
but our
species.
tribe is getting Carl Sagan had a lot to say about this that I loved. Our tribe has been expanding from small families to small groups to nation states, city states to nations. It's going global, and the internet's a big part of that.
First, before we go on to Nick, I want to accept that the word religion is a very wide term. Mm-hmm. So it's not fair for me to make that statement at the end and it not be defined. But I do believe it in what I mean, and perhaps that's a topic for another discussion. Nick, what do you have to say?
Well, with regard to religion, I would say I would look to the very height of the Crusades for the bonding that occurred between Knights Templar, Knights Hospitaller, and the forces of like Saladin and all of that sort of thing, and to see that we can form an in-group, and we don't have to be out-group centric in that sense. But the one issue, I agree that our universe is sort of expanding, our social universe. The internet has brought people together, unbelievably, and that's going to continue as far as we can tell, as long as the global economy, sticks around in some way that makes sense. But I would say that the one issue that I do see, and this has been true for a long time now and is getting even more true, is that it's very hard for human beings to have a social in-group that's greater than 150 individuals. That's what the studies show. So to have a true in-group, I think there's a second class of in-group that is sort of outside of the immediate in-group, the family and direct friends, sort of a class of acquaintances. And if we could expand our social consciousness to at least consider everybody else as a potential person in that group, I think we'd be all right.
Nick,
right?
Just for clarification, were you being sarcastic when you used the Crusades as a good example for why an in-group is? No.
I there were a lot of really good exchanges during those holy wars between the two cultures that were very positive. There were relationships between I'm thinking of specific groups. I mentioned the Knights Templar and the Knights Hospitaller and the forces of Saladin because that's a specific one.
But there was also a ton of murder.
No, that's not what I'm talking about, though. I'm saying in the midst of that horror, in the midst of that terror.
But don't you think that point proves the detriment of an in-group more than it does the benefits?
Of course it does.
Okay.
No. The in-group is, other than psychopaths and sociopaths, in-group is endemic to humans. Everybody has an in-group, and the maximum for the core in-group is 150 individuals. Okay. For every human being. That's pretty much the maximum of.
Okay. Well, I take your point, and I have much to say in response to it, but I am very glad that you, as well as everyone else, joined us in this conversation. The time has come to close the show, and as a closing, I would like for us to sing together the Make New Friends song. It goes like this: Make new friends, keep the old. One is silver and the other gold. Let's all sing that together.
Yeah.
Make new friends, keep the old. One is silver and the other gold.
Maybe we can work on that.
That's
we should go on tour
beautiful.
with that.
That's beautiful. Dr. Jones, do you have anything to say in closing?
I do. I've been very impressed sitting here just listening. I wanted to start out reading scripture for one particular purpose because it seems like most of us have been using it as the premise of this kind of rhetoric. And I was so happy to hear that everyone simply left that behind them and ignored it and went on and had a much more meaningful conversation. So I think that each and every one of you guys contributed much. Michael, I was very impressed with what you were talking about, these altruistic genes. Can you say something more about that before we close?
Sure. Thanks for your kind words. The idea is that humans have an ability with our cognitive ability. We hit a threshold that's so far beyond other creatures that are on this earth. But we have to recognize that altruistic behavior is a part of life itself.
Right. This is the first time that I've met you, seen you, etc. I'd love to have you on our show. If we can arrange that soon, I would love that.
I would very much enjoy that.
Are you friends with Kaine Diatheke on Facebook, Mike?
No, I'm not, but I can send me a friend link, and I can go right to that.
Very good. That'll be the best way to make arrangements. All right, everybody, thanks for joining us. We hope to have some or all of you back next week. Did you have anything else you want to say, Dr. Jones?
Yes. One of the things that I would like to do the next time that we do this, I would like to establish the premise. In other words, I don't think that it was established this evening. Where did morals come from? I would like to hear more about that the next time that we talk.
Well, everybody had varying opinions on that.
Well, I mean, but it was only to a slight degree. It wasn't really.
You're hurting my feelings.
That's good.
All right, guys, we're going to do the show over in just a few minutes. Okay, so we're going to scrap this. We're going to start all over again.
And start from scratch.
Okay. All right.
What's this?
Oh, nice.
Is that Bob playing the guitar for us?
Bob, can you play some metal?
Some heavy metal?
Yeah.
Right. Bob, rock us out of here. Come on.
No, I left my Marshall in the garage.
All right. And with that, I'm going to say goodbye to our audience and to our participants. We'll see you Sunday.
Oh, and to the audience, I wanted to make one final note. We're keeping the Hangout going. Anybody who can find us, you are more than welcome to join it. I won't be able to stick around through all of it, but I'll keep it up and running.
To a capacity of 10. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye.